Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for coming to our workshop on the powerful role of social media in resettlement. This afternoon, we're going to hear about 3 new research projects that have all explored different elements of this topic. My name is Leah Hamilton, and I'm a professor at Mount Royal University, cross-appointed to the business school and the psychology department. I'm coming to you today from Calgary, which is situated within the lands of the Niitsitapi, Blackfoot, the Aheed Nakota, Tsuut'ina, and Métis nations. I'm thrilled to be chairing this session today. For this workshop, each of the 3 presenters will be given 15 minutes to present, and then we'll have a short 5 to 10 minute Q&A after each talk. At the end of the entire workshop, we'll have at least 10 minutes for sort of an overarching Q&A and an opportunity to share some best practices about social media in resettlement. We'll hear 3 amazing talks today, the first by Ranju, the second by Nafiz Shuva, and the third by Luisa, Veronis, and Huan Wang. I'll introduce each presenter in more detail right before their presentation. But we'll get going right away with our first presentation. This is about how social media impacts Chinese immigrants' acculturation experiences in Canada. It will be presented by Ranju, who's an assistant professor in public relations in the Faculty of Business and Communication Studies at Mount Royal University, and myself. So I'm going to turn things over to Ran now.
Thank you, Leah. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for attending our workshop. My name is Ran, and I'm going to co-present this study with Leah. So as you can tell, as the title indicates, this study explored social media's role in immigrants' acculturation process, and we specifically focused on Chinese immigrants. Now, before we go to the details of our study, I'd like to provide you with some background information. As we know, immigrants are a huge part of Canadian population, represent 1 in 5 persons in Canada. And China is among the top 3 source countries for immigrants in Canada. However, compared with other immigrant groups, Chinese immigrants may struggle more with acculturation due to the perceived culture distance and the language barriers. Now that we know social media is an important tool for immigrants to stay connected with their home country and the host country, so that we bring that social media component to Chinese immigrants' acculturation process. So we basically relied on this theory, interactive theory of communication and cross-cultural adaptation as our theoretical framework, which proposed 4 important components in people's acculturation process. Predisposition means could include preparedness of change, ethnic proximity, adaptive personality. And then in the middle is the communication process, which is, according to the theory, very important process or factor in the acculturation, which include personal communication, social communication, host communication, and ethnic communication. And then the outcomes of acculturation or adaptation could include functional fitness, psychological health, and intercultural identity. And then the environment of the host country also plays a role in this process. Then we reviewed the relevant studies using this theory, and related to our research topic, we identified 2 gaps in the literature. The first gap is most of the studies focused on international students' experience, which is so different from immigrants' experience. And also we would like to add social media as another component of the ITCCA theoretical framework. So here we wanted to add social media in this part of the theoretical model. Then, in order to address these 2 gaps, we developed 2 overarching research questions for our project. The first one is, how do Chinese immigrants use social media in their acculturation process? The second one is, what is the relation between social media usage and acculturation outcomes? So we designed a 2-phase study to help us to address this question, and Leah will present the phase 1 study focus groups. Over to you, Leah.
All right, so as Rand said, phase one of our project involved focus groups. We conducted these for two primary reasons. First, to understand the social media use of Chinese immigrants in Calgary, wanting to use an exploratory qualitative approach. And linked to this was a secondary reason, which was to inform the development of phase two of the research. So in February of 2020, right before the pandemic made its way to Canada, we conducted 3 in-person focus groups, each with 8 participants for a total of 24 participants. These focus groups took about 90 minutes each, and Ren and I worked together to consecutively interpret between Mandarin and English. We audio recorded the focus groups for accuracy, and at the end of the focus groups, we had participants complete a demographic survey, including some self-reported measures of English language proficiency. So as I mentioned, we had 24 participants from mainland China, 10 women and 14 men, and they had all lived in Canada for 10 years or less, on average, just over 4 years. The average age of participants was about 47, but we did have quite a range represented, which actually made for some hilarious moments when talking about social media. The majority were university educated, about half were currently employed. Most immigrated through the economic or family immigration categories, which is what we expected. And as I said, we did ask participants to self-report about their perceived English language proficiency on a 4-point scale. And on average, participants reported fairly low English language proficiency. So turning now to the results, again, we're trying to understand which social media platforms people used and for what purposes, but we also wanted to understand people's perceptions about how social media helped or hindered their integration. We don't have a ton of time to get into the results. You can see lots of rich quotes in our published paper, but here are a couple things that came up that we wanted to mention today. So straight out of the gate, we learned that the majority of participants rely heavily on WeChat in Mandarin for many, many functions. So this quote represented what we heard from a lot of participants, which is that WeChat can satisfy 90% of my needs. But when digging a little bit further, we realized that participants articulated some tensions around their use of WeChat. So after they talked about its many uses and benefits, they were quick to point out that it had 2 sides, as they said, or that it was good and bad at the same time. And the quotes on this slide sort of elucidate those tensions a little bit. And essentially, participants expressed that WeChat sort of became a cultural bubble. So they found that it was really great at connecting with other Chinese immigrants in Canada and Calgary, but they found that they sort of stayed in that comfort zone and then were less likely to communicate with people in Canada who are not from China. Some of these quotes included, WeChat has everything. They're all Chinese immigrants on WeChat. And I think this more or less hinders our communication with local people. It hinders our acculturation. It's a small circle. And so I would say one of the biggest takeaways from the focus groups was this sort of love-hate relationship with WeChat, or this tension. Participants had a lot of self-awareness about it. They loved WeChat. They thought it was super helpful with finding information, particularly during early resettlement, but then it kind of created this comfort zone and bubble. And people felt that it hindered their language acquisition, English language acquisition, and meeting locals. So this is something we wanted to further understand in phase 2, which Rand will talk about next.
Thank you, Leah. So after phase 1 study, we went ahead with our phase 2 study, which was a survey research study. There were 2 goals of this phase 2 study, which were to understand the social media usage pattern in terms of which platform and for what usage, and also to test the association among different social media usage and acculturation outcomes. And we specifically focused on psychological and sociocultural adaptation, language proficiency, and identification with Canada and China, respectively. So we said phase 1 study was also aiming at inform phase 2 study. Based on the results from phase 1, we decided to focus on 3 social media platforms: WeChat, YouTube, and Facebook. And then from the phase 1 study results, we learned people use different social media platforms for different purposes, included to connect interpersonally with people from host host country and ethnic country or culture, and to collect the information about both host country and ethnic country, and to learn English, and lastly to watch shows. And this activity was only on YouTube. So based on all of these information, we developed a measurement of the specific use of each social media, which has 11 items, and one sample item would be I use WeChat to read information about Canada, and the participants indicated the frequency of this activity from not at all to very often. Now, we proposed this model for our survey study. Basically, we assumed that each single use of specific social media platform would impact the acculturation outcomes. Again, sociocultural adaptation, psychological adaptation, Chinese identification, Canadian identification, and English language proficiency. So we collect the data using a online survey form. There were two versions of the survey questionnaire provided to our participants. They can choose to finish the English version or Mandarin version. And in the questionnaire, there were Likert type scales and also demographic information was collected. Participants were recruited from our partner organization as well as WeChat, as my own WeChat, and one of the research assistants WeChat. After data being collected, we utilize the two strategies to analyze our data. The first one is a frequency analysis. Basically, this analysis told us the usage pattern of social media in acculturation in terms of which platform was used most often and which function was used the most often. And then we also utilize the structure equation modeling technique to test the relations between different social media usage and acculturation outcomes, while controlling other confounding variables such as language proficiency, length of the time in Canada. So the data analysis produced several very interesting results. The first result, the first interesting part of the result was, of course, WeChat was very impactful. Several activities on WeChat had associations with different acculturation outcomes. Some of the associations are positive and some of them were negative. So interestingly, people learning English through WeChat actually negatively related to sociocultural adaptation and English language skills, which is pretty concerning, to be honest. And then learning English from WeChat was also positively related to Chinese identification, which is also another interesting correlation we found out. Then using WeChat to connect to family and friends at home means China, so was positively related to Chinese identification and Canadian identification. It was also positively related to psychological adaptation. So that is the WeChat results part. And of course, YouTube and Facebook had some impact as well. So using YouTube to learn English and obtain host country information were positively related to psychological adaptation, and use Facebook to obtain host country information, so information about Canada, was positively related to psychological adaptation. These are just the main findings, and we have more results if you wanted to read. It's on our paper. It's open access paper, so you don't need any database to access to this paper. Now, based on the results, we found some theoretical implications as well as practical implications. In terms of the theoretical implications, we strongly suggest scholars to look at each social media platform using specific communication activities instead of looking at one platform as one variable. So from our results, it is suggested that obtaining information on YouTube and Facebook about Canada actually were positively related to psychological adaptation. However, the same activity on WeChat had no impact or no relation with any outcome association, outcome of acculturation at all. And the second theoretical implication was about the new dynamic social media brought to acculturation and communication. So the ITCCA theoretical framework basically said any ethnic communication, they pretty much hinder the acculturation process and would be negatively related to host country identification. However, our study suggests ethnic interpersonal communication on WeChat actually was positively related to host country identification, which is a totally different result from the theory, what the theory indicated. Now, this study also had some practical implications. First of all, is I think our research really informs the future settlement program. First of all, specifically to Chinese immigrants, maybe we wanted to encourage them to avoid WeChat for language acquisition because it had negative association with the outcome. And also we wanted to encourage agencies create their own virtual language platforms or apps because you do see people use the social media for this purposes, and also more cost efficient way is just to create a YouTube English learning channel. And then the next practical implication is about the pre and post arrival programs. They can definitely harness the social media to provide information about the receiving country, but it is very important to ensure the information provided is accurate. So at last, we really wanted to express our sincere gratitude to our very hardworking research assistant, Seeing Lam from University of Calgary, and Lauren Trefford, who was a MRU's PR undergraduate student. We also wanted to thank our partner organization, Calgary Chinese Dongbei Association, and of course, we want to thank SHIRK because the study was supported by a SHIRK PEG grant. So that is the end of our presentation. Thank you for listening.
Thanks so much, Rand. We do have a question coming in from Jody Armstrong from the Northeast Newcomer Services, who's asking, would you suggest that organizations have their own WeChat account to connect with Chinese clients? Great question. Rand, what do you think?
Yes, I think I would say yes, but I wanted to point it out. It only works for Chinese immigrants because we don't see other immigrant groups use this type of social media, or they just heard of it, but it's only for Chinese immigrants, and it would be a very useful tool and to establish your own Chinese own WeChat account to reach out to immigrants.
Yeah, and maybe just building on what Rand said, I'm sure many of you have noticed that there are large differences when we think about which particular newcomer or refugee group we're trying to connect with. So for instance, in my work with Syrian refugees, I found that community often uses WhatsApp. And so I think just in an ideal world, perhaps we would be offering different information and resources on a variety of platforms, which I know is resource intensive. Any other questions?
I think I see one question from Haiming Li. So the question was, I wonder what does sociocultural adaptation include? This is a really good question. So basically, sociocultural adaptation means to what level immigrants are comfortable with the social system here in terms of knowing the political system, education system, even public transportation. And I don't remember any specific items, but if you go to our paper, we said which scale we've used, and you can trace back to that scale. It has 11 or 12 items, I think, but don't count me on that. And also, I do see another question from Paul. Can you talk specifically about how WeChat could be used for pre-arrival info sharing? So Leah, do you want to talk about it?
Sure. And I'm not sure if this is a perfect answer, so please jump in, Rand. But I do recall our participants saying that when they were living in China, they were only able to access resources that were created by the Chinese government. So I agree that maybe WeChat could be used for pre-arrival information sharing. But Rand, do you have a sense of whether that would be allowed?
I think there's a certain level of censorship, of course, but I personally don't think they will censor pre-arrival information on WeChat as long as that information is accurate. And if you want to talk about how to use WeChat specifically, I think set up an account and it works like WeChat basically works like a combination of Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And if people they follow your account, they can see the posts. So you can just share pictures, share video, and or just textual message about the pre-arrival information. And then there's also a function called the group, which allows the organization of online community. Our participants did talk a lot about being in a group receiving information every day, so that group function also could be one of the strategy to share information, I think.
Great, thanks so much, Ran. Thanks for all the great questions. We are going to move on to the next presentation, but we should have time to come back to some of these questions after. So thank you very much. And
Thank you.
we are going to turn things over to Nafiz in just a minute. I will do an introduction here. So our second presentation is titled Online Ethnic Social Media and Newcomer Settlement Results from a Mixed Method Study on Bangladeshi Immigrants in Canada. And this will be presented by Nafiz Shuva, who's an assistant professor in the Faculty of Information and Media Studies at the University of Western Ontario. Take it away.
Thank you so much, Professor Hamilton, for the introduction. In today's presentation, I will briefly discuss the use of social media tools, in particular, ethnic community social media forums and the role those ethnic community social media forums play in newcomer settlement into Canadian society. The data for this study was collected as part of my doctoral study on the settlement information behavior of Bangladeshi immigrants in Canada. I completed my doctoral study at the University of Western Ontario in April 2020. So let's get to today's agenda first. Given the time limit, I'll briefly show some of the core studies reporting the significant use of the internet and social media tools among recent newcomers, including refugees. Then I'll talk about the research methods for the study, for my study. After that, I'll present the demographics for interviews and surveys, and I'll then share some of the core findings relevant to this presentation, and then finally offer some policy recommendations. So briefly, recent studies on newcomers' use of the internet and social media tools, such as Burkhardt et al. 2018, SS and her colleagues on Canadian immigrants in 2013, and Coyer in Australia 2016, report significant use of the internet and social media among newcomers and immigrants, including refugees and international students. The results of these studies are not surprising, but highlight the importance of social media in newcomer settlement in a new country. So let's get to my study. So this is a visual representation of the research methods of the study. As you can see, the study was a mixed method study. I employed both interviews and surveys to gather a comprehensive understanding of the information behavior of Bangladeshi immigrants in Canada. I first interviewed 60 and Bangladeshi participants in Southern Ontario, and then conducted surveys. I received 205 completed responses for my surveys. I employed various recruitment strategies and tools to spread the word about the study and gather a large number of responses. I received a huge excess benefit because of my insider status, being a Bangladeshi student in Canada at the time of my study. So I'll first present the interview demographics and then survey demographics. Out of 60 interview participants, most of them were skilled immigrants and their dependents. Of them, the majority of them were male and arrived in Canada between 2006 and 2016 onward. Most of the participants had university degrees before moving to Canada. Similar to interview participants, most of the survey participants were also skilled immigrants, and the majority of survey participants were male and moved to Canada again between 2006 and 2016 onwards. The survey participants were also highly educated, with over 90% having university education before arrival to Canada. So let's get to the findings of this study. For today's presentation, I will first present the findings on the internet and social media as pre and post-arrival information sources, and then I'll present survey data on the social media uses in Canada, and then finally I'll present interview findings that highlight the role ethnic community social media play in immigrant settlement in Canada. Newcomers need information before and after arrival to Canada. They gather information about accommodation, employment, education, and about other settlement aspects from a variety of information sources. Although my participant reported IRCC website as the top pre-arrival information source, internet and social media emerged. Internet and social media were also one of the important sources of pre-arrival information sources for them. So the information before they arrived to Canada, they're looking for, so they were using those information sources. When it comes to post-arrival information source, although again IRCC website and friends and professional colleagues this time were among the top post-arrival information sources. However, web search and online forums, including the ethnic community forums, were among the top 5 post-arrival information sources for Bangladeshi immigrants in Ontario. So in short, it is clear from the survey data, it was clear that internet and social media tools, including the ethnic community forums, were becoming one of the core sources of information for Bangladeshi skilled immigrants and their dependents in pre- and post-arrival context. So the survey participants, I also asked them about questions about whether they use social media in Canada, and which is not surprising. I know 99% of them, survey participants reported using social media tools in Canada. When asked to report the tools they use in Canada, the top 5 social media tools were Facebook, YouTube, Viber, Skype, and LinkedIn. I know Viber is not very popular in Canada, but among Bangladeshi, yes, it's very, very popular so far. For the next part of my presentation, I'll be showing the findings emerged from my interview data that highlight the role ethnic community social media forums play or could play in newcomer settlement in Canada. So as evident in my survey findings, many participants used online forums and groups for gathering settlement-related information in pre- and post-arrival context. Many interview participants used online forums and groups for gathering settlement-related information. In the interview data, Bangladeshi ethnic community social media forums were mentioned in both pre- and post-arrival context. Most of these forums were established after 2010 to help support various newcomer groups, including international students in Canada. For example, the Facebook forum, the ethnic forum, Bangladeshi Canadian, Canadian Bangladeshi, aims to help newcomers to Canada by providing information about various aspects of Bangladeshi immigrant settlement, including accommodation and employment. Another prominent Bangladeshi Facebook forum called Prospective Bangladeshi Students in Canadian University, established in January 2012, offers information and guidance to international students from Bangladesh with information on admission to Canadian universities and general help with their settlement in graduate schools in Canada. Some recent newcomers in my study reported using Bangladeshi ethnic community social media forums and receiving numerous benefits, including getting information and guidance on various settlement aspects, as well as creating networks with co-ethnic community people. Interview participants who moved before the ethnic community social media came into existence, or those who were not aware of the co-ethnic social media forums at the time of their settlement, reported not receiving important settlement information and guidance like the recent newcomers receive having access to co-ethnic community social media forums. So let's look at what some of my interview participants said about the Bangladeshi social media forums. Noman, those are pseudonyms, who moved to Canada in 2010, highlighted the role ethnic social media forums play nowadays in meeting newcomers' various settlement information needs. When Noman moved to Canada, there wasn't much ethnic community forums. However, he noticed that recent newcomers ask various questions to members of the Facebook community forum, including questions about where to move, as well as questions related to employment opportunities and other settlement aspects. Another participant, Maruf, who did not have access to the ethnic community social media forums when he moved, touted the role ethnic social media is playing in newcomer settlement in Canada, especially recent newcomer settlement in Canada. He thinks that 98% of the settlement issues are resolved consulting this ethnic social media forums like BCCB, Bangladeshi Canadian Ethnic Forum, Facebook forum. Iqbal, a supply chain professional at the time of the interview in Canada, and a recent immigrant also who used ethnic social media forum, extensively used that, reported using ethnic community social media forums, gathering information about lifestyles, transportation systems, and other aspects in pre-arrival context. Shamrat, also a recent immigrant, reported the existence of various ethnic social media forums, including some offering resources in Bengali language, the official language of Bangladesh. Shamrat thinks that the co-ethnic social media forums are doing a lot of work to help newcomers with their settlement. Hashi, the final quote, a business professional in Canada, believes that recent newcomers who are connected with the co-ethnic social media forums in Canada may know everything about Canada even before moving to Canada. She did not have access to those forums at the time she moved to Canada. However, she thinks newcomers receive information from this forum, which are very useful for their settlement in Canada. For this presentation, I thought I should quickly share some of the ethnic community social media posts to highlight the information sharing and networking in those forums. These are some of the examples of newcomers asking questions or asking help for finding job, employment in Canada. And also co-ethnic social media forum members share relevant job information for newcomers, and some of them offer guidance and help newcomers connect with potential employers, which is, I would say, for newcomers to Canada, this is certainly is a great help. So these are some of the posts related to looking for accommodation, just few posts and different social media forums. These are some of the Facebook posts by immigrants asking for help or information with children's education, weekly mail, driving school, and other aspects. So they do consult those forums quite regularly for not only just for only settlement, but also for their everyday life, in their everyday life context. So the social media are playing a significant role in immigrant settlement in terms of gathering information in pre and post-arrival context, creating networks, and learning about employment opportunities. The use of co-ethnic community social media forums among Bangladeshi immigrants in their settlement and everyday life context have some policy implications. Many interview participants describe receiving various benefits from these ethnic community forums and claim the roles they're playing in recent newcomer settlement into Canadian society. This finding has implications for policy development, for settlement service awareness and delivery context, especially related to spreading the availability of existing settlement services to various newcomer groups. As you know, the federal government of Canada, the provincial governments and other stakeholders make large financial investment in various settlement services designed to help newcomers from diverse backgrounds settle into Canadian society. However, some studies, including my doctoral study, show that a large number of immigrants do not use settlement services in post-arrival context. The use of pre-arrival settlement services is even more perplexing. A recent report by IRCC 2018 confirms that the pre-arrival service intake among eligible newcomers is significantly low. One of the reasons for the lack of the use of settlement services may be the lack of information about the availability of settlement services for newcomers. People may not know about the existence of relevant settlement services or programs, or may not understand the value of those services. One of the ways IRCC and settlement agencies can increase the awareness of the settlement services among newcomers would be to partner with online ethnic community social media forums that focused on immigration and settlement for newcomers, including international students. The co-ethnic social media forums may even be able to translate the IRCC messages and documents in immigrants' mother tongue and may advocate for government-sanctioned settlement services for newcomers. IRCC and settlement agencies can even take initiatives to connect newcomers with ethnic community professional networks to help them receive professional advice from those ethnic professionals who are already established in their professional sectors. So briefly, creating meaningful partnership with co-ethnic community social media networks and organizations of newcomers to Canada may be very useful in informing newcomers about various settlement services and programs Canada offers, as well as help them make informed settlement decisions. The partnership will certainly help newcomers verify the information they receive from various informal information sources, such as family and friends, and will help them make the right decision based on the information they get from various settlement agencies. So before I end my presentation, I would urge settlement agencies working with diverse newcomer groups to identify and research the co-ethnic social media community groups who might be potential partners for spreading the word about their programs and connect diverse newcomer groups to the relevant settlement services and programs. I think we shouldn't ignore the potential role ethnic social media can play in newcomer settlement and should find ways to collaborate with these platforms to better serve newcomers and immigrants to Canada. Thank you everyone for listening.
Thank you so much, Nafiz. Our third and final presentation will be conducted by Dr. Luisa Veronis, who I've been fortunate enough to collaborate with on other projects. Luisa holds the research chair on immigration and Franco-Ontarian communities and is an associate professor in the Department of Geography, Environment, and Geomatics at the University of Ottawa. And she'll be presenting some work that she completed with Huan Wang, who's also here today. She is a PhD candidate at Hunan Agricultural University in China, who's currently a visiting student researcher in the Department of Geography at the University of Ottawa. They'll be talking about newcomers' labor market experiences during the pandemic and the role of social media for network building.
Thank you very much. I want to thank Leah for inviting us to join this session, and I'm glad we're going third because our presentation really builds on the two previous ones. It's kind of an in-between the two topics that were discussed. This is very, very recent findings. We conducted our interviews since August, and some of them are still ongoing. So a lot of it is quite preliminary, and really we're seeking input and feedback. So because we just started analyzing, we don't really have a framework, but hopefully I'm looking forward to reading Rand's and Leah's paper and get some inspiration. The focus of our presentation of our project is on newcomers' labor market integration in Ottawa-Gatineau and builds from previous research we have done because of the unique geographical situation of Ottawa-Gatineau on the interprovincial border, which means that there are two completely different settlement systems, with Quebec and Ontario being across the Ottawa River. And the complexity of the local situation is enhanced by the presence of asymmetrical bilingualism, meaning that both French and English are spoken, but they're spoken by different proportions of populations on each side of the border and in different institutional contexts. We're also building on a recent report my colleague Brian Ray wrote with an analysis of census data with regard to labor market in Ottawa-Gatineau, and he found some really interesting results with regard to the unique labor market structure in this region because of the prominence of public administration, with the federal government being the largest employer and a lot of second-tier employment being linked to the needs of the federal government. Also unique is that Ottawa has one of the highest median incomes in the country, as well as immigrants with the highest levels of education. So the purpose of the research was to try and understand the role of gender, language, origin, as well as occupation. So because the last intriguing finding of Brian's census data analysis is that STEM-related fields have the highest levels of income, and actually Asian and South Asian born individuals dominate this market at the expense of all the other groups. So this project was supposed to take place before the pandemic, but everything got into a halt. So we ended up finally being able to conduct the interviews starting this summer. Originally, our focus was to understand the role of language and gender in skilled workers' experiences in Ottawa-Gatineau. And we were interested in looking how individuals and household strategies were working together. Now, since we were able to conduct the interview after the beginning of the pandemic, we also added an examination of the impacts on newcomers' economic integration. So very briefly for the methodology, this is a collaborative project conducted under the SSHRC-funded partnership Building Migrant Resilience in Cities. And at the core of this partnership is collaborating with local government and non-government organizations. Part of this project, the design and the objectives were determined with the Ottawa Local Immigration Partnership and local settlement organizations, both in Ottawa and Gatineau. We primarily conducted semi-structured interviews, and we also had a demographic profile going with the interviews, our focus being newcomers who had been in Canada under 5 years. So most of our participants arrived in 2016 up to even a few months ago in the midst of the pandemic. Our focus is on immigrants who arrived as skilled workers or under the family reunification category. And we want to include both men and women, as well as newcomers who had English or French as their first official language, regardless of places of origin. And we also wanted to have a small pilot within our research with individuals in STEM-related professions, and our findings are quite intriguing with that regard. So we have so far completed all the English language interviews, and we had 24 participants, almost equally distributed between men and women, skilled workers, family reunification. About half of them arrived before the pandemic, and the other half arrived either a couple of 2-3 months before or during the pandemic, and 4 of them are in the STEM field. The French interviews are still ongoing, so the presentation is based primarily on the English-speaking participants' findings. And in terms of origins, we have pretty much every world region represented. Also important is that a large majority of our participants have previous international experience, either studying abroad or working for several years, and often in multiple countries. Many were also multilingual, speaking primarily English, and among our Francophone participants, a few didn't speak English, but language didn't seem to be a problem for most English-speaking participants. So we have 3 main themes, but I'd like to focus primarily on social media. I was a little excited and thrilled because the findings were all new, so I may have too much, and I will maybe cut to the chase. So first, the impacts of the pandemic on newcomers' economic integration. Generally, we notice a significant difference in terms of time of arrival. So those who arrived before the pandemic or right before, during the pandemic, have had very, very different trajectories in terms of finding employment. But the people in STEM occupations stand out from everyone else, regardless of the time of arrival, because they generally manage to find a job right away, which in fact coincided with an increase of demand for IT-related work during the pandemic. As I said, language, we don't really see trends except for very few French-speaking participants who don't speak English and who have been penalized. But in contrast to a previous research, English-speaking don't seem to find as many challenges with the bilingualism in the region. The main finding that emerges is the role of social networks, and I think it has been very much already mentioned in the two previous presentations. So I think our findings here, which are in a different context and with slightly different methods, really reinforce the significance of social networks. So all the participants, regardless of time of arrival or profession, immediately understood that social networks was key to finding employment in Ottawa-Gatineau, with many saying the jobs are not posted, but they heard from someone who knew someone, and so on and so forth. And actually, some participants even activated the social networks before arrival, including through the use of social media. And this was particularly so among the STEM-related field. And a couple actually secured a job even before coming to Canada. So they had applied, and when the time of traveling got closer, then they activated and got jobs. But many among our participants only became aware of the significance of networks after arrival. And so with regard to what Nafiz was saying, we also saw that pre-arrival services were not known and very little used. And many told us, if I had known, I could have prepared a lot better before arriving. So in terms of the role of social networks, some find out once they got here, including by using settlement agencies, like this quote where she learned through the program at World Skills, a local employment organization, that she needed to do more networking. And just randomly applying online wouldn't yield. She got this advice before the pandemic, at the time where you could get to know people face to face. Another participant who arrived during the pandemic, he arrived right before the pandemic and he got all the networking going. He said it was like a networking fire. But as soon as the pandemic hit, he said it totally killed my ability to network. And this is one of the most significant impacts that we have seen, given the significance of social networks for employment, that participants who arrived during the pandemic had a very, very hard time. And in part, this motivated them to turn to using social media. In a way, what I'd like to argue is that the pandemic, in fact, really put a magnifying glass on the significance of social networking to get jobs because of the pandemic, since everything else was not as possible. A few participants used services at settlement agencies, but there was mixed feelings. Some were ambivalent about how useful settlement services were, and this sort of ties in with them using the internet and social media. While others, and maybe this is anecdotal, it was especially women, managed to get jobs through the programs at the local settlement agencies, but they found them useful for advice, for preparing their CV, interview, and also to learn about how to network. Another interesting finding that is still a little bit anecdotal, the participants who arrived during the pandemic told us a few times that a significant impact is that they don't really know Canadian society. They only got to experience Canada under the pandemic. And so they felt they don't really know how things work outside of the pandemic, sort of in normal times, which they found difficult on the labor market. In terms of the strategies they mobilized, it was really activating social networks. And here it builds on the two previous presentations, including family who may have been here before, friends, but also significantly their ethnic community, and in some cases, the religious community. And I will turn to the internet and social media in a minute, but the participants who were ambivalent about settlement services really told us they wanted to do things their own way. They didn't want to use the settlement agencies, which they didn't like the programs and the services. So they did a lot of research on the internet and used social media. Also, we found a number of participants who decided to go back to study, particularly because of the pandemic. But I will jump now to the social media use. So here, and this is where really our findings kind of are between the previous two presentations. So first, we found that they used a variety of different social media, and that each of the different media, in fact, had a different purpose. So with regard to what Ran and Leah said, we also, on the next few slides, will show you how each specific social media was useful and in what ways. The one that seemed to be the most productive was LinkedIn, and many participants used it. They were able to communicate with recruiters, with HR, with managers, and quite a number of participants landed a job in that way, including the lady who got an offer before even arriving in Canada. So this participant here said, I found that LinkedIn was a very powerful tool here to get to make connections. I reached out to the recruiter of the company, then the recruiter connected them to the manager, and then they got the interview and they got employed in a matter of weeks. So here, in terms of the different types of uses of social media, LinkedIn really functions for network building, so to build professional networks. Many of the participants used it to communicate directly with HR, recruiters, even managers. But sometimes it was through an introduction of someone else they met on LinkedIn. But in many cases, this landed them a job. In the case of Facebook, here we see really the ethnic groups working, but also either job-specific or professional groups, but it's through Facebook groups that things are working to exchange advice, information, and also to help with network building, but not so much to communicate directly with companies or to actually land a job. So here, a participant that have used Facebook group called Ladies Who Work. It's been really helpful. And someone else said, so Facebook is not so much for job. I was using mostly to attend webinars. They give us guidance about getting jobs and employment opportunities. So it's more of a word of mouth functioning. WhatsApp was also commonly used, and again here more for informal social networks, friends, family, and co-ethnic networks. We also found, nevertheless, that some participants really didn't like using social media or they didn't find them useful. So some tried using LinkedIn, but it didn't get a lot of results. And someone else spoke of the fact that they didn't like the online job fairs. They weren't working as well as others. So we had a little bit on the pandemic and family, mostly an intriguing finding. A lot of the participants had family, and under positive, the first bullet, I'm really intrigued. I want to look more closely at the positive impact in terms of family bonding and quality time, especially among those who were very, very recent newcomers. So for our discussion, just wanted to highlight the significance of social networks, and probably we also want to probe more into occupation, particularly STEM. Individual differences in social media use, also the fact that different ethnic communities may have different types of presence and connectivity. And lastly, I'm very intrigued by differences in the use and perceptions of settlement services. And lastly, would I mention the fact that our participants didn't know or didn't use pre-arrival services, even though they did say they wished they had known. So here our findings go along what Nafiz says. So our thanks go to the BMRC partnership, and we thank you for listening and look forward to receiving questions.
Thank you so much, Luisa. Very interesting presentation, and it's really wonderful to see how the three presentations connect and how, you know, there's a strong message here that different communities have different preferences, different connectivity, and so on. Lots to chat about. So I do want to make sure we give some time to Luisa and Huan in case there are questions specifically about their presentation. So perhaps we can spend the first 5 to 7 minutes with questions for them, and then we'll open it up more broadly. So if anyone has questions for Luisa and Huan, please put those into the Q&A or the chat. I think Monica asked a question here for you, Luisa, if there's information on newcomers and employment scams, or is that where ethnic groups online can help?
Okay, thank you very much. It's a really important question. We actually, among our participants, didn't find anything about employment scams. So this is something that maybe we need to probe further. But as far as I know, no one mentioned anything. Obviously, in a previous study we did, there was a lot of concern with identity theft and security, particularly accessing accurate information. I would anticipate that maybe on Facebook they could be scams, but no one mentioned one. I think the fact that they're skilled workers, they're highly educated, all of them had experience, I think maybe they're able to identify scam. And I guess here is something significant of our studies, because we focus on skilled workers who are highly skilled, who are familiar and comfortable using internet, social media, there's probably less risk, or it's easier. It comes, more. They have more facility in general, whereas in my experience from previous research, refugees, and depending on the world regions they come from, it's a lot more challenging. So see, Monica has a quick follow-up on what social networks were activated. So it was usually on LinkedIn, trying to already find out about professional opportunities, develop networks. In the case of the Brazilian participants, they communicated with the Facebook group, Brazilians in Canada or Brazilians in Ottawa. A lot of them had already friends or the cousin of a friend, or they had sort of informal social networks, and it was getting advice and so on and so forth. So these were the social networks. And I wonder whether the pre-arrival services that Canada offers could, well, first of all, make themselves better known, and then tap into the LinkedIn, which for skilled workers, so again, this is a very specific group, there may be opportunities to accelerate looking for jobs. Some of them said, you know, I did an interview, we got along, they liked me, and they got hired on the spot. So this is surprising, as I'm so used to the negative stories of how difficult they can't land interviews in spite of sending hundreds of CVs. And here among our participants, it was some just did one interview and they got the job. So it's a different story. I wonder whether our findings point to differences with occupations. So one of the participants who had a very hard time was an accountant from Hong Kong, and actually she had studied in Ottawa at Carleton, went back to Hong Kong, and then came again. So her English was quite good, and I'm not sure what is going on with her, because she does everything right, and she has sent lots of CVs and it hasn't worked. So I wonder, with regard to occupations, whether very specialized occupations nowadays are sort of more favorable or easier, whereas if people have kind of a general background, whether in teaching or management, I don't know if it's the draw of the luck, but generally their English was quite good, and many of them had experience working or studying abroad in English or even in other languages. Quite a few were really multilingual. It was amazing to see such accomplished immigrants.
Great. So Luisa, do you want to maybe take one more question about the household strategies, and then we'll move to some questions that were posed to the group?
Okay, so I don't see the question. So we haven't done yet the gender and household analysis. On top of my head, I can't think of anything what I found useful, and it just so happened that we interviewed a few couples. So we interviewed both the adult spouses of the same household. And in a few cases, the story was a bit different, but generally all of them said, some of them had very different occupations or professional backgrounds. They all said they took the decisions on their own. And they would always say, well, obviously I have my spouse's support or the help. But so far, even those who were couples, it seems that because they're professionals, because they're skilled workers, they're really thinking about their own career progression. And this was often their motivation for coming to Canada. They were all in really good situations wherever they were before. And it was generally either because they had reached the top, either the pay would not get better, or in some cases, like countries like Algeria or Brazil, it was socioeconomic and political safety issues that drove them, but they all had fantastic situations back home. Nevertheless, they were hoping here to kind of pursue that. So in that sense, I think it was their own individual strategy, but we haven't done the analysis yet.
Thanks so much, Luisa. So I'm going to pose a question now, which is sort of a combination of questions that were posed by Natasha from the Bull Valley Immigration Partnership and Nargis from the Hamilton Immigration Partnership. And both of these individuals were sort of asking about best practices, or are there agencies that you see that are doing this well, that are really leveraging the power of social media? Nafiz, we haven't heard from you for a while, so if you have any thoughts around that, please feel free to go ahead, and then maybe we'll turn things over to Ran and then back to Luisa.
Yeah, in terms of the leveraging the social media tools, I find almost all, especially in Ontario, Access Employment, Will, Connections, they do use social media to promote their services and to share what's coming on, the workshop and everything. But what I find, I've been following over 3-4 Facebook social media forums and some blogs, and I haven't seen any of the social media forums kind of promoting those services for newcomers. I always see that people ask for, what can I do for this? What kind of employment support I can receive? All those kind of things. So people, what they do, usually what they try to do actually to help them connect with the ethnic community network. So it's again Bangladeshi, helping them to meet Bangladeshi, but not informing or kind of giving the information about the services on different settlement services, including the need-based settlement services for newcomers. And that's where I really find that the settlement agencies, including IRCC, really have a lot to work on to make sure they have a partnership. Because to be part of that, from my personal experience, if you really want to be part of that ethnic social media forums and you want to share the information, I can guarantee you, from my perspective, from the moderators I know, they're certainly happy to share the information to help really connect newcomers, potential newcomers, the international student, to the agencies offering different services for them. So those, I would just say, so far they're doing great in terms of, especially the large settlement agencies. but they're mostly using their own platform, their own Facebook forums, which many of the newcomers may not know about, or may not have any interest, or may not know the benefits of using those.
Thanks, Nafiz. Ran or Luisa and Huan, do you have anything you'd like to add?
I think I can share some of the insights from our study, and Leah, feel free to jump in. So I think based on our study, I don't see any official organizations use social media quite effectively. But one thing I noticed from our data is our participants talked a lot about groups. These are self-organized, community-based groups. For example, some of the participants said they like explore outdoor activities. So they have an outdoor activity WeChat group, which include all the immigrants, no matter recent immigrants or long-time immigrants. And they do not only talk about outdoor activities, of course, they talked about any information they needed to know about Canada. And also, I think one of the participants mentioned a good point is they felt like official organizations service may not exactly match the need. And one of the example that participant raised is about English learning programs. They were talking about they wish to learn just how to use English to order Starbucks, how to use English to go to restaurants to properly order food, rather than saying I want this and I want that. But no official language programs offer the services like this, that it's almost like a how are you doing, I'm doing fine, thank you, something like that. So I think I see most of the organizations that use social media effectively is the self-organized one, not the official one. And secondly is the community-based. We also heard one of the participants said that the community he lives in has a community-based WhatsApp group. It's all about people who live in that area, and of course there's lots of immigrants in that WhatsApp group, and they help each other. So that's my our observation. Leah, feel free to add things I missed.
No, that's great. Let's move to the next question. So Mark from the County of Huron Economic Development asked all speakers around sort of risks that newcomers face in social media spaces and how they might navigate those. And I know that Luisa kind of said there wasn't a lot of employment scams happening that you saw in your study. With Ran and I know that several participants talked about, being placed in vulnerable positions and being taken advantage of. But does anyone have any thoughts around this idea of mitigating risks and vulnerability in these spaces?
So from our previous study with Syrian refugee youth, where the sort of safety and cybersecurity came up, one of our recommendations, and I think this could be especially more so from groups who have low levels of literacy or low levels of digital literacy, is for settlement agencies to run workshops, especially for youth. And now there's more and more research that connects youth issues with mental health and a variety of sort of digital addictions of all kinds. So I think, these are still relevant, but I wonder, and this is maybe something that we can discuss all together based on this, how much do you think there may be sort of specific needs with regard to ethnic groups, or depending on the country, the culture of origin? So you spoke of WeChat, which is very specifically around the Chinese community, and Nafiz, your work was more specifically with Bangladeshi, South Asian, and in our case, it's a specific class because they're skilled workers who are very educated. So I really wonder, but because of the significance of the ethnic groups, whether it depends on whether there is an ethnic community, and then sort of the digital habitus of those communities. I don't know if you have any thoughts based on your findings.
I mean, I would agree with you, Luisa, that we need to be thinking about, overarching sort of workshops and courses, but also more specific training based on group. And I'm really glad you mentioned youth, because I think we absolutely need to be paying attention to those needs and their own vulnerability. And I think too, age can play a factor. I mean, Ran and I noticed some big differences between, younger newcomers, and we had some who were, grandparents in their 80s. And so, again, when we think about scams and vulnerability, we need to take these sort of intersectionalities into consideration. And so I sort of think that, taking an intersectional approach to how we train folks on social media usage, everything from where to find information, but also how to avoid being taken advantage of and so on is really important. Well, I want to be sensitive to the time. It's 2:17. I know many of you have places to go. I want to thank all of our speakers today. It was a really enriching conversation. I enjoyed it a lot, and I think it was generative. I certainly walked away with new research ideas, and I'm still continuing to think across these interesting projects. And I want to thank the audience for being so incredibly engaged and asking lots of fantastic questions. I'm sorry we didn't get to them all, but they were great. I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference, and hopefully we'll meet in person maybe next year. But thanks again for coming, and I wish you a great day. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Okay, bye. Thank you, Leah, for organizing, and thank you, Ran and Nafiz, for great presentations. And you already have your papers out, so congratulations. We just got started analyzing. So if later on you have any thoughts or suggestions, it would be great. So it was great to know you, and thank you again, Leah, for putting this together. And thank you, Juan, for being there.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. Thank you,
Thank you,
Leah, for
everyone.
organizing this.
Bye.
Yeah.